A young Roman soldier stood in formation near the Trebia River, gripping his shield a little too tightly. Word had spread through the ranks that morning. Hannibal's army wasn't just infantry and cavalry. It included something none of these young men had ever seen up close. Massive gray shapes emerging through the morning fog, each one taller than 3 men stacked on top of each other, moving in an eerily coordinated line. The horses screamed and reared before the soldier even understood why. Then he saw them fully. War elephants. And in that moment, an entire Roman cavalry line simply fell apart in panic, long before a single blade was even drawn. So, here's the real question worth asking. How did ancient armies actually turn one of the largest land animals on Earth into a functioning weapon of war? Because taming an elephant is one thing. Getting it to charge directly into chaos, screaming, fire, and blood, without turning around and fleeing, that's something else entirely. This story actually starts way earlier than Hannibal, all the way back around 4000 BC in the Indus River Valley. Early civilizations there began experimenting with training elephants, and it's easy to understand why. These animals were enormous, strong, and, crucially, intelligent enough to actually be taught complex behavior. Over centuries, this evolved into a serious military tradition across ancient India. Kings trained elephants not just to fight, but to carry archers on raised platforms, trample enemy soldiers, and function almost like a mobile tower you could shoot arrows from, while your enemy's infantry tried to figure out what was even happening. Here's where the psychology really matters, and it's honestly the most important part of this whole story. Most soldiers throughout history had never encountered an elephant before facing one in battle. Their sheer size, their deep bone-rattling trumpet calls, the way the ground seemed to shake as they charged. None of that required a single sword swing to be effective. Fear alone could break enemy formations before actual combat even began. Horses especially, animals that hadn't evolved alongside elephants, would panic uncontrollably at the smell and sound of them, throwing their riders and turning organized cavalry into chaos within seconds. This tactic spread fast. When Alexander the Great pushed into India, he came face to face with King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes, where Porus reportedly commanded around 85 war elephants. It was one of the toughest fights of Alexander's entire campaign, and it left a lasting impression. Word of these creatures spread west, and eventually, Persian forces adopted them too, using elephants to guard flanks, intimidate enemy cavalry, and smash through defensive lines that infantry alone couldn't break. Now, let's get into the part most people don't think about. How do you actually train something this massive to walk toward danger instead of running from it? This is where the science of animal behavior becomes genuinely fascinating. Elephants weren't bred in captivity for this purpose. They were almost always captured from the wild, because breeding and raising them specifically for war was far too slow and expensive. Trainers, called mahouts, would spend months, sometimes years, building trust and obedience using consistent commands, physical guidance tools, and repetition, teaching the elephant to kneel so a rider could mount, to charge on command, and to dodge or maneuver around obstacles mid-battle. Male elephants between 25 and 40 years old were considered the ideal choice, specifically because they were physically at their peak, and because female elephants tended to retreat if an aggressive male elephant approached them on the battlefield, which made males far more reliable in actual combat. Carthage eventually built its own elephant corps too, though using a different, smaller species, North African forest elephants, which were easier to transport and required less logistical support than the massive Indian elephants used further east. And this brings us back to Hannibal and one of the most audacious military decisions in ancient history. In 218 BC, he made the almost unbelievable choice to march his war elephants directly across the Alps to surprise Rome from a direction nobody expected. The journey was brutal. Freezing temperatures, narrow mountain paths, and treacherous terrain killed most of the elephants before they even reached Italy. But the ones that survived still played a critical role at the Battle of Trebia, where they successfully panicked Roman cavalry and helped tip the battle in Hannibal's favor. But here's an important exception worth understanding, because war elephants were never some unstoppable, guaranteed advantage. Enemies eventually figured out how to fight back. Romans discovered that elephants had a surprising, almost comical weakness: pigs. Specifically, The high-pitched squealing of terrified pigs could send elephants into a panic, sometimes causing them to trample their own soldiers instead of the enemy. Armies also began using caltrops, sharp metal spikes scattered on the ground to injure elephants' feet, along with specially trained anti-elephant infantry units. At the decisive Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Roman general Scipio Africanus used a brilliantly simple countermeasure. Instead of trying to block Hannibal's charging elephants, his soldiers deliberately created open lanes in their formation and blew loud horns, letting the terrified animals run straight through the Roman lines completely harmlessly, without causing any real damage at all. So, when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, war elephants represent something genuinely unique in military history. They weren't really weapons in the traditional sense. They were living, breathing psychological tools, animals whose raw size and unfamiliarity did more damage through fear than through actual combat power. And just like any weapon, once enemies studied and understood them, their effectiveness started to fade. By the time gunpowder weapons became widespread centuries later, elephants gradually disappeared from serious battlefield use altogether, becoming more of a historical curiosity than a military necessity. So, picture that same young Roman soldier again, years later, an experienced veteran now, watching a new recruit freeze up at the sight of enemy elephants for the very first time. He'd tell him what he eventually learned the hard way. It's not really about the size of the animal charging toward you. It's about whether you understand what's actually happening and whether fear gets to make your decisions for you or you make them yourself.